Our next speaker is John Carse. John is a field CISO at SquareX and brings over 20 plus years of experience in security leadership, starting with US Navy, spanning global roles at Dyson, Rakuten, Expedia, and JP Morgan. His expertise has crossed continents that we'll learn in our today's talk as well, from Japan to Bahrain to Hawaii to Singapore, shaping modern security programs worldwide. Also, a big thank you to SquareX for sponsoring this talk and supporting these important conversations. Today, he'll discuss Shadow SaaS in CloudFirst world, shedding lights on the risk lurking in the unsanctioned cloud apps. With that, I welcome John. Please give a big round of applause.
Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. So we have a pretty quick agenda. We're going to talk about modern enterprises, what's going on today that's different from what's been going on in the past. We'll define what Shadow SaaS is and some of the security risks that are there, and then how do we want to deal with them. So to start, I was already introduced, but to just give you a little bit more of my background, I've been a CISO at multiple companies, some of them regulated, some of them not regulated, and have been defending networks for a long time, since going back to like 2003. Before then, I was at Apple and IBM doing solution architecture and solution design delivery, but I really love cybersecurity and have been in it for a long time. So what's happening in modern enterprise IT is that there's been somewhat of a shift in the market, right? What used to be is that we used to deliver our own technologies in our own data centers. And in 2025, that's a big shift is happening. We've been shifting for many, many years, a couple of decades now, but estimates are that about $5.8 trillion is going to be spent worldwide on IT, and about 51% of that's going to be in the cloud. Altogether, 70% of that's going to be application spend, and SaaS apps is going to be in the cloud. So that's a huge amount of money that's being spent today. And I would say that enterprise IT isn't like enterprise IT was 20 years ago. We're in a situation where most of the IT folks that are really leading are actually in the big cloud providers. When I have IT teams today, running teams today, the level of expertise that my team has for like building, developing, and deploying applications is far reduced than what I had 20 years ago. So it's a big shift in the market, and a lot of that's being driven by the SaaS, right? There's kind of this flywheel that's going on around SaaS products, where you have the cloud that was introduced, because we had browsers for a long time, and we had other technologies like HyperTalk back in the Apple days in the mid-90s that were very HTML kind of oriented. But in the mid-90s, we started getting browsers, and those were great. Really, not a lot of functionality, but with the cloud coming, we started having platforms where we could deliver software faster. And that introduced the need for better browsers. And so we started getting new technologies like the VA technology that's in the Chrome browser. We started getting HTML5. We started getting other ways of communicating, like WebSockets, that we could then drive single page applications. And that gave us a lot more capabilities on this platform that we could also deliver fast on. And then on top of that, the SaaS players are then developing apps who then need more functionality out of the browser and need more functionality out of the cloud. And so you kind of have this kind of flywheel effect that's been going on for almost 20 years. And even though all this has been happening, it's changed how we work. And the way that we work today is that we spend an incredible amount of time in the browser, working from tab to tab to tab to tab, window to window, but we're all over the place. We use the browser so much more today than we did before. And if you're in enterprise IT, SaaS essentially offers speed, agility, lower risk. It frees up our teams to focus on what actually moves the business forward. And the big takeaway to this is that the shift to the cloud is speed to value. Modern browser architectures and capabilities that allow SaaS apps to kind of function have really driven our need for the browser to do what it needs to do today, right? So, there's a number of when you go and you talk to companies today, it is completely different than it used to be, right? When we talk about cloud-first strategies, that's where everyone goes to the cloud first. That's AWS, GCP, Azure, at least in the United States. In other countries, there's other places. But we go to the cloud first because it allows us to innovate fast, right? It may not be the best place to run your business long term, but we can get something delivered in front of customers very quickly. That allows us to have faster time to value, both on the enterprise IT buying side and on the sell side, to kind of figure out where we get to product market fit. But all of these things have really somewhat driven an entire industry to drive SaaS apps into the enterprises, right? So, but I think one of the things that we need to talk about is what Shadow SaaS is, right? Shadow SaaS refers to unauthorized or unsanctioned software as a service applications that employees and departments are using without the knowledge or approval of their corporate IT or the security teams, right? It's a subset of Shadow IT, and we talk about Shadow IT. We talk about Shadow IT in enterprise IT and organizations for many, many years, but this Shadow SaaS is a little bit different because we hardly know where people are going, right? So we don't know what's going on with them, right? And so there's some examples of what Shadow SaaS is in your organization. If you're talking to people and they're using Google Drive or Dropbox instead of OneDrive, if you're an M365 shop, they're probably using some Shadow SaaS. Trello, Canva, HubSpot, these often get used by different teams in the organization. And then, we of course get, developers, trying out all sorts of different things in the environment. And when you're a CISO, your developers are both your friend and your enemy. So it's kind of nutty, but they have a lot of productivity tools to help them get stuff done, and some of them are kind of dangerous to us, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But one of the reasons why they're adopted so quickly is because they make it incredibly easy to use. The businesses that are running SaaS apps, they want you to adopt them. So they try to, give you the fastest way for you to get into their programs. And so if they can have sign in with Google or sign in with Apple, that's a really quick way for you to onboard. They know who you are, they know your address, they know information about you, and they can, start marketing to you faster and give you an experience that allows you to adopt it. But these, I would also say that there's also productivity pressures. There's a lot of people that, they maybe have a Google mindset or a Microsoft mindset. They might have a Salesforce mindset versus a HubSpot mindset. And people want to work with what's comfortable to them and what makes sense to them. And that also helps productivity. As business owners, we don't want to stop productivity. We want people to be productive, but there is some risk involved with it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think another really important concept to talk about is business-led IT. So what is business-led IT? In different parts of the organization, you have, most of the time when we talk about IT, we're talking about a centralized IT organization. However, there are also other types of IT organizations. There are decentralized IT organizations where everyone makes their own decisions. It's very common in small companies that you have decentralized IT. There's no single person making IT decisions. It's kind of whatever people want to use. Then we also have federated IT examples where there is actually good governance and structures in place that allow businesses to run and own their own IT, but they do it inside of a governance structure that's coordinated with the central security or other parts of the company, right? So when business-led IT is not Shadow IT is when there's collaboration with central IT and security. There are frameworks in place for procurement, how to control data, and architectures and how those things are going to work together, and it operates part of a federated IT strategy. Business-led IT becomes Shadow IT when IT is completely bypassed. There's no visibility into the tools that are being used. It creates security, data, and compliance risks, and it duplicates existing capabilities that lead to a lot of vendor sprawl. So, so when you're thinking about when you're looking at your organization and you're talking about Shadow SaaS, there are some people that are going to talk about business-led IT, and that's just, in some senses a factor of how business operate today. So security risks and challenges, right? So modern organizations, as I was saying before, and I'm going really fast here, so slow me down a little bit. If y'all have any questions, let me know. But modern organizations today are increasingly reliant on SaaS applications to boost productivity, collaboration, innovation. With so many tools available, at the click of a button, just sign in with Google, employees often adopt new software to solve immediate business needs that they have, especially when their internal solutions are falling short of what it is that they need to do. So they might have gaps in what they're trying to do. They'll do some Google searches, and then they'll find something that they think will work for them. And that has really caused a big market of SaaS tools that are available today, and we have a lot of SaaS tools that are available today. Another thing that I think is interesting about today's marketplace is that it used to be that websites, that browsers were just website renderers, really simple HTML. I remember back in the mid-90s, I was at Apple, and there was NCSA Mosaic browser, and it was like the first browser. And I remember getting it and downloading it, and it had some bookmarks. There was no Google, you couldn't just search for things. And I would go to the bookmark, and I would go to the University of Chicago, University of Wisconsin, look at these websites, and they were just horrible, terrible places to go. And I remember taking the browser, putting it in the trash, emptying the trash. This is 1994, somewhere like that. Emptying the trash and saying, this web thing is not going anywhere, okay? That's really what I thought. I thought the big thing there was gonna be like encryption. I thought encryption was going to be the thing. So I was spending all my time with like S-MIME and all sorts of encryption techniques to do things when I was at Apple, and that didn't go anywhere. I mean, even today, it's like cryptography is not as adopted as you would think it would be. But the application platform today that we have with browsers, it's an incredible platform. It's almost like its own operating system on its own, right? It has renderers, it has subsystems and I'll have an image for this. It has an incredible number of capabilities that are built into it to allow the extensibility of the browser. And that extensibility creates a lot of capability inside the browser that we can do anything with. I mean, today, I can get on a Zoom call or a Google Meets call, and I'm doing it all in the browser. That was not there 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But with the advent of the browser and what it's able to do today, we have an incredible amount of capabilities that are there that people are leveraging and using to create applications that we love. And this is just kind of I wanted to give you all a view of like all the kind of complexities that the browser has in place. It has a number of network protocols that are being used to allow single page applications to work inside your browser. There's so many event level systems that are happening inside of it. We talked about credential storage, which is somewhat of a risk, and some other kinds of things. But there's an incredible amount of capabilities that browsers are able to perform today that we need to be aware of. But all of this power and all this capabilities produce some risk for us. With respect to, unsanctioned apps predominate. What I mean by that is that I did an audit at one of the companies I worked for, and when we did the audit, we only looked at 25% of our staff, which was around 3,000, 4,000 people. And what we found was that we had like somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 some plus SaaS apps that we were using in the organization. However, my organization only had 230 apps under management. So they were part of our MFA, SSO, conditional apps policies and that kind of stuff. But the rest of the 600 were pretty much Shadow SaaS. I had no idea who was using them. I didn't know what was going on with them. And it created a big risk, and that was only 25% of my organization that I did for this audit. Recently, Okta had a report that the average number of SaaS applications that are being managed by their IDP is around 138, something like that. But other research is also showing that my numbers that I had when I was at this company were pretty much true for everyone. So I really think that most companies probably have around 400 applications that are inside their environment, and 270 of them they don't even know what they are, right? They don't know who's using them or anything, right? And I'll tell you an example from like 2018. I remember we decided that we were going to use Trello because we had some project management. We wanted to have Kanban boards or whatever. And someone decided they were going to use Trello. And we started putting all of our security projects into Trello and everything else, and we're managing the project. And then the guy who was running the project left the company. And then no one could administrate it anymore. And then we figured out it wasn't part of our SSO. We couldn't administrate in any way. And then we tried to get control of it. And we never got control of it. And today, in 2025, I can still get to that Trello board with all of my security projects and what the statuses were when we finally abandoned it, right? Which is an insane thing. And so there was another research that said that 31% of users still have access to the applications that they had access to when they were a part of their environment. And I think, again, this is a large part of like what's going on with SaaS. And again, once you try to get control of the apps, it's a legal nightmare, right? So you go into AWS, for example. We had a whole bunch of people that were at one company that I was working for, had a whole bunch of environments that were using their corporate credentials to get into them, but they weren't part of our structure. And when those people left, we tried to get control of them. And it took 6 to 8 months for me to go back and get control of all of those projects that were being left and abandoned, even though they were our credentials, to get control of. So I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on here with this, with SaaS and Shadow SaaS and such. And I couldn't get through a talk without talking about Gen AI. And so with Gen AI, what we're seeing is that 75% of US employees are using Gen AI tools at work, right? And then we're also seeing that the number of DLP events associated with Gen AI is reaching like 55%. That means that people are putting confidential information that's not supposed to be leaked outside the corporation into their organizations. And most people don't have enterprise agreements. I know that one of the companies that I worked for, when we were doing this, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people that were using ChatGPT every single day without an enterprise agreement. But this is not new. We've been dealing with laws and control of data through the browsers for what seems like decades now, right? And I don't know if y'all know about Pastebin. Do y'all know Pastebin? It's this place where you can just post anything that you want. And people are just using that for exfiltration. They use it for writing code, and then they're able to get their malicious code to run this code that was also like linked into Pastebin. So we've been dealing with Pastebin for a long time, but we also have a number of free products that everyone uses as well. For example, Postman, which is a great tool. I love being able to test my APIs and everything in it. But when you're a free user of that product, any API keys or any credentials that you put in the product are just public. All the repos are public when you're not a paying customer. And that's true of GitHub repos as well. But we've also been having Word PDF converters that have been on the websites forever. Those are really great exfiltration techniques for not really exfiltration techniques, but if I was an actor and I wanted to harvest intellectual property, I would put a Word PDF converter website up just so that I can get you to send me your intellectual property, and I now have it. I give you a service, but that's the way it is, right? But I think the most important note is that free SaaS services don't offer the same protections and agreements that enterprise agreements have. So paying customers give a different level of service. But this is also a big problem for SaaS and makes Shadow SaaS a big problem, right? And then uncontrolled data share. And I was just talking about how 31% of former employees still have access to company SaaS data. That's an incredible number of people. And if you just think about the churn of people that are going through organizations and moving organizations every few years, that's a lot of data that's just being left uncontrolled, just out in the wild, waiting for someone to compromise that environment. In the old days, we used to talk about like anti-evil maid strategies for our laptops, and we would have encryption on the laptops, but we still wanted people to hold on to their laptops when they were traveling so that someone couldn't remove the drive, copy the encrypted drive, And then when someone figured out how to break that encryption because there was a vulnerability in SSL or whatever was being used to encrypt, then someone could then encrypt that drive later. What we're doing today in this slide, what I'm trying to convey here is that we're leaving data all over the place. If you have 600 apps or 400 apps that are in your environment and you are having people churn through your environment, they still have access to stuff, and they're reusing passwords and everything else that they're not supposed to be doing, you have an incredible amount of data that's just sitting out in the wild waiting for someone to break into it, right? Whether they lose their credentials today or they use their credentials, a year from now, these places can then be harvested for your intellectual property as well. So it's really important to keep up with that. So what do we do about this? So I think the first thing to do, and the easiest thing to do, is to let your users know that there is a right way of doing SaaS, right? What is the governance structure? Have you as an organization communicated to the organization what is the process for onboarding a SaaS app, right? Your users need to know that there's right ways of doing it and there's wrong ways of doing it, and if they're going to be using SaaS apps, what do you do? Like, you got to do something to let them know that you don't want them to do it, right? So the easiest thing to do is send them an email saying, hey, this is the guidance. Make sure that it's in your AUP. Make sure you have an application security policy, and this is CISO kind of talk. So put the governance model in place, and let that know. That's the easiest thing to do. The next thing is you want to get them into your education programs, right? Where in your annual refresher for security, make sure that you have something about Shadow SaaS in there so that everyone is always getting a refresher about it. After that, it becomes a remediation problem. And the first thing you have to do is discover how big your problem is, right? So you need to find out not just what SaaS apps are being deployed, but you need to understand whether or not they're being used, where they're being used and how they're being used. Are they being used with corporate credentials like, John at squarex.com, and I'm using it, but I'm not part of my MFA program? Or are they using it with their own personal credentials and such? It's like, know what that is. Know whether or not they're using MFA or SSO, right? So that you know how protected that is. Know whether or not they're reusing credentials, because they could be reusing corporate credentials in the environment. I don't know. This is an example of somewhat of a business-led IT problem. But back in 2014, when I was at JP Morgan Chase, we had a marketing website that was not on our network. And we had our JP Morgan Chase employees, they had been, and this is like public information, there's nothing, this is, if you go to the wiki 2014 breach for JP Morgan Chase, this is all somewhat documented today. But what happens is they went to a marketing website that was for the JP Morgan Chase Marathon in New York, and people were putting their JP Morgan Chase credentials and their passwords that they were also reusing. And those credentials were then used to breach the JP Morgan Chase network in 2014. And this is why you want to discover it, because when people are reusing credentials, those credentials can be used forever, right? And if they're reusing them in other places, you want to kind of get that under control. But you want to know this. You want to discover what these problems are. You want to know where your users are also using OAuth consents. For example, they may be using Zapier with their Google account and signing in with their personal Zapier to manage their Google account. You want to know that consent has been given to some other organization, so that you can then go back and get control of those credentials or revoke them and those kinds of things. But you got to do that discovery process. And of course, I hate to blame users for anything that we can control with technology. So I would propose, figuring out how do you get control of your SaaS controls. Like, start getting that under control by having a curated list of SaaS apps that you're able to use, and having technology that helps you go and get that done, right? And of course, streamline the onboarding process for SaaS apps, because the worst thing you can do is put a process in place and then your users can't use it, nothing gets happening, everything gets pushed up to executives, and then next thing you know, as a cyber person, you're being told you're just going to have to onboard apps even though they're not in control because there's a business purpose. You really got to make sure that your processes and your governance and everything are kind of come together. So that enablement part's really important. From a security controls and monitoring perspective, you want to be able to detect weak access management. Apps in MFA, folks not using SSO. You want to implement IDP integration, security controls in your executives, especially around your crown jewels, and not just where your SaaS apps are, but also when your control systems. Like for example, some of you may have SAP, you may have AWS or Google. What you want to be able to do there is make sure that that your IDP controls for the folks that have like root access to your AWS, you want to make sure that those systems are controlled. Those are the crown jewels that I'm talking about, right? Where your data is also crown jewels, but you have different level of crown jewels that you could use. But you also want to integrate Shadow SaaS monitoring into your SIM workflows, right? So once you see someone that's doing something with Shadow SaaS, how do you get that into a place where people can then do something about it, whether that's your governance people that are going to go out there and talk to the users about what their use cases are, get exception requests and those kinds of things in place. How do you get them? If it's an important app, how do you get it into your program once you've discovered it? But you want to get that to someone so that they can take an action on it. You don't want that to be an annual kind of thing, even though you should do annual kind of things as well. But use technology to have a SaaS app whitelist, right? Know what SaaS apps that are sanctioned, and if someone tries to go to another SaaS app, make sure that it's an exception that request. Also, if you have OAuth restrictions available so that you don't have people asking for consents that they don't need or that you think are risky to your organization or too expansive, you want to be able to control that. I mean, of course, there's you're going to have a lot of conversations with your business about those things and what's good or not bad, but you also want to be able to prevent uploading and copying and pasting from unsanctioned apps. So you want to be able to control that, right? And so there's technology in place that allows you to do these kinds of controls. And then again, from an audit and remediation perspective, once you know something, you got to go take care of it, right? So, but conduct regular audits on your risky apps, right? And the behaviors that your teams are having. And make sure that critical apps are under governance, right? This is something that you want to do on an annual basis. And then, of course, regularly audit OAuth app authorizations, revoke any unnecessary risky procedures, any integrations that you might have in your organization. For example, if you're using Zapier or some other tools to do automations in your organization, that may have been okay during your enterprise agreement, but if you decide to go away from them, how do you backtrack that? There's really like two things that you need to worry about anytime you're, as a security professional, when you're onboarding new vendors, you're onboarding new applications. The easiest thing to do is to get into an app. The hardest thing to do is get out of the app, right? So you're gonna have to have both strategies of how do I get in and how do I get out, right? And part of this remediation, these suggestions, is to make sure that you have a process in place to be able to revoke authorizations, if that makes sense, right? And I think I'm almost on time, so I have some time for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? You just, that's okay. I talked really fast, covered a lot of topics. Is there any questions anyone might have? No. Thank you all for coming. Nice to see everyone in the... Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John, for sharing your insights on how to address Shadow